Bagshot Park, the royal family's most secretive royal residence.
It's a wonderfully private place.
This is not a house that's open to the public, not even when they're not in residence.
And the home of their most powerful secret weapon, Prince Edward and his wife Sophie.
The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh are probably busier than they've ever been.
For over 500 years, Bagshot Park has always been at the centre of royal life.
Bagshot Park is a house with some serious royal pedigree.
We have a legacy of kings, queens, duchesses, dukes, opulence, entertainment.
And it's been loved by all who set foot inside, from Charles I to Queen Victoria.
Victoria thought this was all rather splendid. She was gobsmacked when she saw her son's billiard room. She thought, I want one of these.
It's witnessed some of the biggest royal blunders.
Oh, you can imagine the drama. William, furious, absolutely furious at his uncle.
Become a much-loved family home.
It just looks like the idyllic place to have a childhood.
And seen events that have transformed the lives of those that lived there.
The death of the Duke of Edinburgh and Queen Elizabeth would change the royal family forever.
Worth many millions of pounds and with 120 rooms of extraordinary interiors.
Absolutely stunning. And that's a place where you can just go in and just literally marvel.
This unbelievable property has kept royal secrets hidden behind closed doors for centuries.
Unless you're best friends with Sophie and Edward, you can't go and see it.
Until now. On the 5th of February 2024, Buckingham Palace dropped a shocking bombshell.
Good evening. Buckingham Palace has just announced that King Charles has been diagnosed with cancer.
King Charles had waited a lifetime to take on the job that he was destined to do, but he could never have imagined just how quickly he was going to have to press the pause button on his plans.
And we thought, what's going to happen? Nobody knew, so it was huge news, obviously.
Just 6 weeks later, the country was rocked again. The Princess of Wales released a statement confirming she too was in the early stages of cancer treatment.
Having two senior royals being ill and having to receive treatment that meant they can't do their royal duties is something we haven't seen in modern royal history.
This has really brought the monarchy to a halt in some ways.
These two senior royals are some of the hardest working members of the firm. With them both suddenly out of action, the family scrambled to fulfill all their royal obligations. Luckily, the firm had a secret weapon in the wings. The late Queen's youngest son, Prince Edward, and his wife, Sophie.
The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh absolutely stepped up to the plate when King Charles III needed them.
They are a couple who have never sought the limelight. They have quietly got on with their work.
We've seen how important they are to a slimmed-down monarchy.
They suddenly became extremely high profile themselves.
And as the Edinburgh schedule gets more and more busy, they rely on their beautiful country home in Surrey to relax and recuperate. Bagshot Park. Bagshot is one of the most impressive royal residences of them all. It sits within 51 acres of gorgeous Surrey countryside, just 10 miles southwest of Windsor Castle.
Bagshot Park is kind of like this dreamy, enormous property.
It's very secluded, it's away from the main road, and no prying eyes can see onto the property.
It is a 3-storey, red brick, Victorian, vaguely Tudor-looking house.
In all this acres of land, it's 120 rooms and worth a cool £30 million.
There'd be room for us all to go and stay there. So, frankly, I'm waiting for my invitation.
Prince Edward and Sophie are notoriously private. Since they first moved in nearly 30 years ago, very few members of the public have ever seen inside.
The only glimpses we've had of the decor have been sort of snippets in social media or in papers.
But a little is known about what it's really like behind these closed doors.
There is a sort of corridor that runs through the middle of the house. It's a bit of an artery where all these rooms come off it. There's a salon that leads to the dining room and drawing rooms. There's obviously offices for Edward and Sophie to operate from. It really does feel like a blend of the modern, but with that traditional element that royals tend to do quite well.
Sophie's known for her design, and she was very hands-on when it actually came to it.
There's a lovely conservatory which overlooks the sort of sloping lawns, you know, very formal. And there's a huge commercial kitchen, then there's a sort of smaller family kitchen, and just acres and acres for Louise and James to have fun, you know, entertain friends, to bundle around in.
This giant country mansion is where the couple have raised their two children, Lady Louise and James, Earl of Wessex. But Bagshot Park is more than just a family home. This estate has also played a crucial role in building the Edinburgh's relationships within the royal family.
It's only 20 minutes away from Windsor, so if they need to go to Windsor, they can just pop over.
Most weekends, the kids would go and see their grandparents at Windsor Castle. That could be just going for tea and having a catch-up, or it could be joining the Queen riding in the grounds of Windsor, or even with Philip, it could be carriage driving, which was a passion that Louise shared with him.
They would go to lunch, they would go to tea, they would very often be with the Queen and Prince Philip and sort of, you know, joined in with the life there.
The Queen is reported, and I believe it to be true, regarded Sophie as another daughter.
But whilst Bagshot is now one of the royal family's grandest homes, this hasn't always been the case. In fact, this extensive royal residence started life as nothing more than a pleasant picnic spot. So how and when did it turn into the impressive house it is today? Bagshot Park, Edward and Sophie's vast 120-room country mansion, sits within a stunning 51-acre estate of spectacular rolling hills and ancient British woodland. It's an area of the country that has been loved by the royal family for generations, ever since the building of nearby Windsor Castle, all the way back in 1070.
And what does any royal do? Well, of course they hunt.
Hunting fanatic Henry VIII stayed in this area often. And so did James I and Charles I before he met a tragic end.
Those hunting grounds at Bagshot may have been quite a welcome escape because there were turbulent times. James I, of course, famous for being the target of the gunpowder plot, and his son Charles I met a miserable end because his reign ended in his execution.
These kings could never have imagined the gigantic country house that stands here today. But they were responsible for the first royal property here, a little hunting cottage named Bagshot Lodge.
The architect Inigo Jones, who worked on many royal commissions, was brought in to make an undoubtedly delightful Italianate pavilion there.
Over the next few centuries, Bagshot Lodge was transformed from a hunting lodge to an impressive country house. King George might have been famous as the Mad King, but he was also known for his very large family. And one of his daughters, Princess Mary, and her new husband William moved into the house in 1816.
Princess Mary had had a very difficult life. Her father, George III, famously descended into madness, which took an enormous toll on the family. It wasn't until she was 40 years old that she finally did get married to her cousin, Prince William Frederick.
Not long after moving in, Mary felt that the house and garden needed a refresh. So she enlisted the help of one of the favourite royal architects of the time, John Nash.
John Nash was brilliant and charming as an architect and designer and a flatterer.
And Nash was responsible for some of Britain's most iconic landmarks. Regent Street, Regent's Park, Marble Arch, and the most famous royal residence of them all.
I think it was his work on Bagshot Park that got him the commission, really, to do the improvements to what was then Buckingham House, which became Buckingham Palace.
But there was just one problem where John Nash was concerned.
The problem with him is that all of his projects were way more expensive than they were supposed to be.
The final bill for Bagshot was £7,500. That's over £500,000 in today's money. Well over budget, but the new homeowners really did love their luxurious residence.
The original house by John Nash looked a little bit like what Royal Lodge looks like now. That's a sort of wedding cake type of house.
Bagshot Park was the forever home for William and Mary. It was also somewhere where they had ploughed a lot of love. Mary had learnt from her mother, Queen Charlotte, about garden design and botany, and much of what is there in the gardens today started as a labour of love for Princess Mary.
So Princess Mary, she decided that she would take about 8 acres of the garden and turn it into a formal garden.
But the house we know today didn't arrive until the end of the 19th century. After her husband passed away, George III's daughter moved out. But the house stayed in royal hands. Queen Victoria decided to give Bagshot to one of her sons.
Prince Arthur was Queen Victoria's 7th child, her 3rd son, and apparently her favourite.
And mother and son were keen to put their own Victorian stamp on it. Prince Arthur had Bagshot razed to the ground and brought in a new designer to make the perfect home, Benjamin Ferry.
He was a very competent architect, but at Bagshot Park what you see is an exercise in restraint.
Even Victoria thought it was dreadfully dark inside.
Despite the understated exterior, the house still needed to be huge, because Queen Victoria's favourite son wasn't one to scrimp. He came with over 26 servants.
Arthur was an extravagant sort of person, which is why he'd knocked down the previous building and had this built with 120 rooms. You know, he did not do things by halves.
Whilst Queen Victoria's son loved his new home, not everyone was quite as keen, including the famous 20th century writer Nicholas Pevsner.
A lot of people hold up as the sort of architectural guide Pevsner, who said of Bagshot Park, it is bad, purposeless, and ugly. I think actually that's a little bit insulting when it comes to the building itself. And just a decade or so later, in the 1960s, a travel guide said that Bagshot Park was sort of the place of dreams.
Prince Arthur officially moved into his dream house with his wife Louise in 1880. And though not everyone loved the outside, the inside was a completely different story. One of these rooms would even go on to inspire a space in Queen Victoria's Osborne House, her astonishing Durbar Room. In the mid-1880s, Prince Arthur had an intricate Indian-inspired billiard room installed in his Surrey home.
Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught as he was, he was a very distinguished military man, and his military career had taken him, well, to the four corners of the world, and he was particularly impressed by India. He loved the wood carvings he saw there. And being a duke, he decided, right, I want one of those.
It took 2 years for Indian craftsmen brought over specially to live and work in the grounds of Bagshot Park to complete the carvings of these panels.
You have to imagine the room, measure it out in India, carve the panels, pack them up, put them on ships, have them reassembled with instructions when you get to England. IKEA, eat your heart out.
and the room wowed everyone who set foot inside, not least the Duke's own mother, Queen Victoria.
Arthur's mum, Queen Victoria, thought this was all rather splendid. She loved it. And so she commissioned her own.
And if Bagshot hadn't been begun, Osborne may never have happened.
Prince Arthur lived at Bagshot Park for over 60 years. And on the 16th of January 1942, it was where he passed away, at the grand old age of 91. A few months later, his grieving widow moved out, and the family's time at Bagshot officially came to an end. But the house didn't stay empty for long.
In 1942, Britain was in the grip of World War II. Fighting had been going on for 3 years. The government started to requisition country properties for the war effort, and Bagshot Park was no different.
Bagshot Park was taken over by the forces and transformed into a military staff college for the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the branch of the military responsible for training women.
They were on the front line, they were cooking, they were driving vehicles. You know, they were there, they were an important part of the war effort. Lots of the areas were also turned over for veg growing, because obviously that was the dig for victory as well.
By the end of the Second World War, around 250,000 women had served in the ATS, many of whom were trained at Bagshot.
The ATS had one very famous recruit. Princess Elizabeth, later Queen Elizabeth II, signed up to do her bit during the war effort. Now, we don't know whether she ever went to Bagshot Park, but it is certainly one of the moments that had a huge impact in her life.
The war ended, but the military didn't want to let Bagshot go just yet.
Bagshot Park stayed within the military family post-war. When George VI offered it to the army chaplains, they used it as a headquarters, a church depot and a training centre.
For the next half-century, Bagshot was out of royal hands.
Because the army chaplains really hadn't got the money to look after the property, there was a lot of work that needed doing.
You've got to remember, lots of foot traffic, lots of machinery sort of going over the land. They weren't caring about the gardens, they weren't caring about the property even. So they just almost completely destroyed it.
What do you do with 120 rooms which are in a pretty poor state of repair?
But in 1998, a solution suddenly appeared on the cards. The Queen's youngest child was about to pop the question to his long-term girlfriend.
I was slightly stunned for a minute, and then I suddenly realised I should actually answer the question, so then I said yes.
You think back on the 90s, 3 marriages had broken up, Windsor Castle had caught fire, there had been divorces and disasters throughout, and then the death of Diana. So by 1999, they really needed something to cheer everybody up.
Sophie Rhys-Jones had come from a middle-class family. Her father was a tyre importer.
She had her own PR farm, and Prince Edward was making his foray into television with Ardent Productions.
They were both working and they'd met through that work. So in many ways, this wasn't the conventional courtship, but actually is very much more in keeping with what we see today.
In the summer of 1999, Prince Edward, Queen Elizabeth's youngest child, married Sophie Rhys-Jones at St George's Chapel in Windsor.
It was very much a love match, and it was a very happy wedding at St George's Chapel.
And in fact, they chose an evening ceremony, so it was evening dress for all of the guests rather than hats and morning coats.
And nearly everyone adhered to that. Not the Queen Mother, not the Queen Mother. She came with her hat. I remember being there at Windsor and standing on the ramparts and looking down at the chapel. And it was a lovely, joyful day.
200 million people tuned in worldwide to watch the wedding of Prince Edward and Sophie.
And I think the hope really was that this time, surely, this is a royal wedding that's going to last.
And everyone was guessing where the young lovebirds might set up home. Was Bagshot Park about to become a royal residence once again? For over 500 years, Bagshot Park provided a roof for all sorts of residents, from royals to wartime heroes. But by the end of the 20th century, this 120-room country house was ready to embrace family life once again. On the 19th of June 1999, the late Queen watched her youngest son, Prince Edward, marry PR girl Sophie Rhys-Jones. And what better wedding gift than a new home? Bagshot Park. She even personally planted a weeping willow in the gardens just for them. Film fanatic Edward became the Earl of Wessex, choosing the title after being inspired by the character Lord Wessex in the 1998 film Shakespeare in Love, whilst Sophie became the Countess of Wessex. But before the newlyweds could move in, this gigantic property needed another makeover.
The scale of the property was really quite overwhelming for Edward and Sophie as a couple, so they really wanted to bring it down to a more manageable size. That meant reducing it down to only 9 bedrooms, 5 reception rooms, and then 3 flats, of course, for the staff that helped them on their day-to-day basis.
Very few people have been invited inside.
Edward and Sophie are very private people, and they've got every right to be private.
And we very seldom see pictures of the interior. I think during lockdown there was a few pictures of Edward and Sophie inside Bagshot Park.
One of the things that we notice about the kitchen in particular is that they seem to be quite modern, maybe even on trend for royals.
Well, the property has multiple reception rooms. We have seen inside the living room when Sophie gave an interview, and it's very comfortable but grand. As part of their renovation, Sophie and Edward had a big conservatory, light-drenched room installed on the property overlooking the lawns. And we've seen inside it has a big wooden table at the centre, lots of huge green plants, and there's even a barbecue in there. So clearly a space they use to entertain.
We don't get much access to their kind of living quarters. It's practical, but it's also elegant. It speaks to their status. It speaks to the house. You're not going to have, IKEA, but there will be rooms where they use everyday furnishing. The house will speak to their 2 different ways of life.
Although we don't know for sure what the couple's private living rooms and bedrooms look like, Sophie and Edward's first home together can give some clues. Before moving to Bagshot, they lived in Buckingham Palace, where society designers like David Hicks had made their mark on some of the private apartments with a bold use of pattern and colour. And it's also possible that the newlyweds took inspiration from the designers used by their new neighbours at Windsor Castle. There, creatives like David Milinarik blended the traditional interiors with modern touches, much like Sophie's own personal style.
I've met Sophie over the years, and she's a lovely woman, and I think she has modern tastes, and I think she's got that kind of chic elegance about her, about the way she dresses, and I would suspect that's the way she's decorated her home.
Sophie is one of the most elegant members of the royal family. She is understated, she is classic, she is sophisticated, and I think while it's difficult in a grand property like Bagshot Park to reflect that understated style, from what we've seen, she has managed to achieve that.
She's made it her own, and you have to take your hat off. I would love an open day though, wouldn't you?
Interiors aside, Sophie and Edward's recent nuptials also provided a peek into what they would be filling their new home with.
Edward and Sophie's wedding list was not your average John Lewis wedding list. On their list of suggested items was a silver teapot valued at £8,800, a pair of silver jugs for hot milk and water at £10,000 each.
In lockdown, I think she was doing a Zoom or something, and you saw her kitchen, and you do wonder those really expensive items on the wedding list. It's like, are those the £10,000 teapots? Like, you know, the mind does boggle. But the thing I love best, on that wedding list in 1999, a £5,000 flat screen television. I was like, thank goodness I did not get invited to that wedding, all right?
Over the next 8 months, 50 to 60 workmen a day toiled on the renovation. It's rumoured to have cost over £2 million, 1.6 million of which was paid by the Crown Estate, with the rest coming from the Prince himself. But the newlyweds weren't just relying on family money for the renovations. Their existing careers were important to both the Earl and Countess, and they hoped to use Bagshot as a base from which to continue them.
Edward and Sophie, I suppose, were the first royal couple who tried to blend a career outside the royal family with remaining pretty senior royals, really.
However, it wouldn't take long for both their attempts at independence to come crashing down. In 2001, Sophie was snared by the news of the world's notorious undercover reporter, Mazza Mahmood.
I remember so well the fake sheikh scandal. The office rang me and said, there's a story coming out about Sophie. It turns out she was at the Dorchester Hotel with someone she thought was a businessman from the Middle East, talking about a possible PR job. And this guy was a fake sheikh. He was the News of the World undercover reporter. He recorded everything that was said.
And during that meeting, she revealed all kinds of indiscretions. She referred to the Queen as the old dear, the Queen Mother as the old lady. She was less than polite about Charles and Camilla.
When the story broke, the Countess of Wessex was humiliated. Bagshot Park became a sanctuary for Sophie, away from the prying press.
It was excruciatingly embarrassing, and it was a rare misstep for Sophie.
It opened a whole debate. Can you have a career and be a working royal? And the answer was no, you can't.
And just as the theatrics around Sophie's scandal died down, Prince Edward became caught up in a drama of his own. Half a mile from the main house at Bagshot Park, Edward had transformed a large stable block into an office for his television production company, Ardent.
From the time that Prince Edward was at Cambridge University, he loved being in the arts. He has famously said that he loved the razzmatazz of show business.
He was way down the line of succession quite quickly. He wasn't, you know, just the spare. He was the spare of the spare of the spare of the spare. So what are you going to do with your life? No, why shouldn't you have a bash at something other than just being royal?
What sort of programme ideas have you got, sir? Well, I'm not going to tell you that, am I?
Edward gave lots of sort of press comments. And he said, one thing I won't do is be making royal films. But poor Edward, the only thing he ever did was make royal films.
And there was one film project in particular which would give Edward's showbiz career a royal send-off.
Prince William decided to go to St Andrews University, and the press would have access to Prince William for sort of the first few days that he was at university, and after that they were to leave him alone. So after the first few days, this crew was spotted still filming Prince William. Then the next day the same thing happened again, and Prince Charles found out this crew were from Prince Edward's Ardent Productions, who were making a royal show.
Oh. You can imagine the drama between Charles and Edward and William. Furious, absolutely furious that his uncle had been responsible for the one film crew that was still following him around.
Both Prince Edward and his wife Sophie's reputations were at an all-time low. By 2002, they'd both closed down their companies and remained hidden from the scrutiny of the press inside their beloved Bagshot Park. But a new life was beckoning.
After both of these debacles, both Edward and Sophie decided that maybe they should just focus on one thing, and that was going to be their royal engagements. Sophie personally admitted in an interview a while ago that actually it took her a while to find her feet as a royal, and part of that was she had to lean on the Queen.
I think there was something about Sophie that the Queen understood, liked, and respected. She wasn't born into this gig, and the Queen understood how hard that was from her own husband Philip, who never found it easy.
Queen Elizabeth II was not only Edward's mum, but also lived close to Bagshot Park, just 10 miles away at Windsor Castle. It's thought that she took her youngest son and her new daughter-in-law under her wing, giving them a crash course in how to be royal.
I remember meeting Sophie at a party, I think it was at Christie's, and she was standing with her back against the wall, and I thought, gosh, Sophie, you mustn't do that because you're going to get totally trapped with some ghastly bore.
Being so close to Windsor meant that Sophie could actually spend some time with the Queen, who would weekend at Windsor Castle, and really learn the ropes from actually watching.
The Queen told her, just plunge in, keep going, don't let people down, and always ask them, ask them about themselves.
But Queen Elizabeth II taught her about duty. She taught her about owning it when you step into that room, about being gracious and elegant. And the Queen also taught her about how much effort goes into putting on these royal visits.
Diana had found her first royal engagements fantastically difficult. And she always complained to me that she'd not been given guidance or help into how to be a royal, really. And I think that's one reason why the Queen really helped Sophie adapt to this new role. And her words were very successfully acted on by Sophie because she's just brilliant.
Sophie threw herself into the Queen's lessons, travelling from Bagshot Park to attend more royal engagements.
Sophie was the chosen one who sat alongside the late Queen in the car on the way to church on Christmas Day, while Prince Philip led the rest of the family walking from the main house to church. I think the Queen was hugely grateful to Sophie for her loyalty to the family.
And many of the organisations and charities she supports have a more personal connection to her and Bagshot Park than people think.
About 2 years after they got married, I got a call saying that Sophie had been rushed to hospital. Not just rushed, but airlifted to hospital. I was panic-stricken, rushed to the office and started reporting the best I could. And it turned out that she'd suffered an ectopic pregnancy. She lost a huge amount of blood, pints of blood. And if that air ambulance had not been there as quickly as it was, she probably would have died.
Sophie is now a loyal patron for her local air ambulance service. But just 2 years later, she faced another medical emergency at Bagshot Park.
When the Countess of Wessex was 36 weeks pregnant with Louise, she went into labour early. Now, she was rushed to hospital via ambulance from Bagshot Park to the local hospital where she had an emergency C-section.
Sophie lost 9 pints of blood during the ordeal, so it was another time that she came really quite close to death.
This time, Sophie wasn't the only one who needed emergency help.
Louise was transferred to St George's Hospital in Tooting in London, where she was in special care, and Louise and Sophie were separated for 16 days.
Whilst in hospital, Sophie had a very important visitor.
It speaks volumes that the Queen went to see her there. Now, this was incredibly unusual. But on this occasion, the Queen felt close enough to Sophie and worried enough about her and wanting to comfort her that she actually went to see her in hospital.
Mother and baby were soon reunited, starting a new chapter at Bagshot Park. But this was just the beginning of the new family travelling from their home for hospital visits.
Louise was born with a rare eye condition, which meant that basically her eyes were a squint. She had an unsuccessful surgery when she was 18 months old and had another surgery when she was 10 years old. And now Sophie does a lot of work with global blindness charities as well.
Sophie has chosen to share these traumatic experiences publicly to raise awareness of the organisations she supports. Much of her day-to-day working life is dedicated to her role as patron of over 70 charities and organisations, reflecting her wide range of interests, including gender equality and sustainable food production. All from her home in Bagshot. Over the next 20 years, the Wessexes began to blossom into their roles as working royals. But with the whole family about to be thrown into turmoil, how would they step up when the new slimmed-down firm needed them the most?
The death of the Duke of Edinburgh and Queen Elizabeth in such a short period of time would change the royal family forever.
Prince Edward and his wife Sophie weren't living at Bagshot Park long before they decided to grow their family. In 2003, they were joined by Lady Louise, and 4 years later by Viscount James. And this stunning stately home offered the two children an idyllic place to grow up.
Bagshot Park is a really private home. It has meant that Edward and Sophie were able to raise their children away from the public glare. Yes, we've seen them at big royal family events, big state events, but generally speaking, they have been able to go about their school days unnoticed and unwatched.
The kids, when they were younger, could run around, they could enjoy the space, climb trees.
They've got horses on the ground, and Louise is a keen equestrian.
And we've actually seen them riding around the grounds of Windsor together as a family at the weekends.
Sophie and Edward were fast becoming important members of the firm. And as Louise and James grew up, Bagshot's close proximity to Windsor Castle meant that the whole family could spend time regularly with the Queen and Prince Philip.
Edward and Sophie have always been very close, actually, to the late Queen and Philip. Sophie regarded her in-laws almost, well, as more than just in-laws, you know. I mean, she called the Queen Mama. She was so down to earth and yet fitted in so well into the royal family.
One gets the sense that of all the children of the late Queen, Edward and his family were really the closest to her, and possibly represented a haven of normality when compared to the marriages and lives of some of her other children.
The Wessexes would actually spend most weekends with the Queen and Prince Philip. They would take the children over there. And in fact, they had such a normal sort of childhood and life growing up that Louise didn't realise that her grandmother was the Queen until she was a bit older. Prince Philip passed on his love of carriage riding to Lady Louise particularly. Now she still competes in competition.
But family life at Bagshot was about to change forever. On the 9th of April 2021, Prince Philip passed away.
Prince Philip died during the COVID pandemic, and so it was hard to see those images of Queen Elizabeth II sitting by herself.
I remember standing outside Windsor Castle the day after the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, and Sophie and Edward had been to visit the Queen. And Sophie spoke to us and she said, "The Queen is doing amazingly well." And she had tears in her eyes and grief written all over her face.
I think that Sophie became closer and closer to the Queen, and particularly after the death of Prince Philip. I think Sophie was the greatest comfort to the Queen. And because she lived so close by, she literally could pop over.
But just 17 months later, the Wessexes had to say goodbye to another beloved member of the royal family.
I think the death of Queen Elizabeth was the end of an era in the royal family. I think there was such a huge outpouring of grief.
After the Queen's death, her body lay in state at Westminster Hall. Louise and James were part of a second vigil that meant that they stood at the corners of the coffin, bowed their head for a few minutes in silence as members of the public walked past. At 18 and 14, that really must have been quite an experience.
But the biggest void was left at Bagshot Park.
When the Queen died, you could see how heartbroken Sophie was. It was very clear from the images in public that we were privy to, how much it had affected her.
I think they were both really, really saddened. Because for Edward it was his mother and father, but for Sophie it was two people who she relied on, actually, to a certain extent. I think she felt that the Queen was sort of a pillar of strength for her.
But whilst it didn't make the loss of his parents less painful, the Queen's lessons resonated with her youngest son and his wife. So they threw themselves into public service.
Everything changes. I mean, the whole royal family reshuffles, and suddenly you have King Charles in control.
And the new king had a very special 59th birthday present for his youngest brother.
Long ago, it had been promised that Edward would become Duke of Edinburgh on the death of Prince Philip. But it took Charles, in whose gift it was, quite a long time, actually, to bestow that title on his younger brother. I mean, it's a very, very senior title to hold within the royal family.
The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh are probably busier than they've ever been as working royals. They really, really stepped into that gap and stepped up to the plate, absolutely. I think it's fair to say we could describe them as, you know, the royal secret weapon.
And Sophie and Edward have recently welcomed another favourite royal couple to the neighbourhood.
Since the Waleses have moved to Adelaide Cottage, they are much closer to the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh than they were before.
William and Catherine get on famously with their uncle and aunt. Sophie and Catherine are particularly close, and I think that probably Sophie has been a very wise mentor and counsel for Catherine in good times and bad.
As Edward and Sophie continue to be a pillar of strength for the next generation of the royal family, what does the future hold for Bagshot Park?
I think we can safely say that Edward likes Bagshot as a house and a family home because he extended the lease by another 150 years.
And that means no matter who is king, whether it is Charles, whether it is William, whether it is George, they still have that 150-year lease. And so whatever Louise or James go on to do, whether they play a role as working members of the royal family, whether they have their own careers, Bagshot Park can remain within the family.
I think the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh absolutely see out their days in Bagshot Park. It is somewhere that they will always call home.